Welcome to another episode of Paranormal, the New Normal. I am your host, as always, Jeremy, trying to make this world seem a little more normal. But today, we might see that because that's my guest's job in a way. My guest today is Stephen Towill. He is I know I butchered the last name, I'm sure, but he is a clinical and spiritual hypnotherapist all the way from Scotland, which fascinates. The fact they're from Scotland just makes it even better for me because I do have some Scottish ancestry, so that's perfect. But first things first, how you doing tonight, Stephen?
I'm very good. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
My pleasure. I'm always excited to have you're not my first hypnotherapist, but I only had a couple, so you're one of the first few. So
Yeah,
definitely,
first Scotsman.
it's always a good topic. It's always a great topic to talk about because it's such unique work that not everybody really could do it. Like you have to have that special knack for it. But we'll see how you got there in a second because the first question I ask everybody is, what got you into the paranormal / spiritual world? Like
Yeah,
what led you down that road?
it's something I've been since a kid. Just a curious, really interested in anything unexplainable. So even from a young age, I can remember reading my dad's Reader's Digest book, which was all ghost stories, aliens, uh, just about anything unexplainable. And I can remember even sitting questioning why is there pyramids in Egypt and pyramids in South America, and that doesn't. How did they manage to do that from all that distance? So I've always been questioning, really curious, and I think the whole hypnosis thing. Again, I can remember about 13, 14 trying to figure out what is this, and it was when I was about 17. I'm 48 now, but when I was 17. It was basically hypnosis. What is it? How do you do this? What's happening with the mind? And so on a way off, taught myself, and pretty much that's how I got into it all. It was just a natural thing from a curious kid, really.
All right, which makes sense, and I could see how you got there. So, did you have any experiences as a kid, like with your own spirits or ghost encounters, anything like that?
I had a couple. I'm probably. I think from what I do, although I work a lot spiritually, it's more of a facilitator rather than reading or experiencing. But as a kid, I did have a couple of things. I remember there was something happened in my room. I always remember the door opened, and then the cupboard door opened by the time it would take someone to walk across. So I got little weird experiences like that. There was another one where I always remember it was kind of through more of a dream, and it was that there was this kind of ghost type thing that was causing a lot of problems. And I always remember realizing that the way not to show any fear. And I remember sitting down cross-legged in the room of this house and saying to it that you can't harm me because I'm more than this. This was when I was really young. I'm more than what you're experiencing here physically. And the thing went away. So it was, so that kind of thing has carried me with me quite a while. There's that I've no fear of any of this type stuff because, as far as I'm concerned, it's just we might not be able to see it, but it's all part of us and it's all round about us.
I like that. I like that attitude towards all this is that it can't hurt you. I mean, I live in a house with a spirit, and that's just. I mean, I've never seen it, but my wife has, and I get eerie feelings here and there. But that's basically always been my synopsis of it all: is it can't hurt me. It
Mm.
can't really hurt me, so I'm not gonna be scared of it, and I'm just gonna live with it until I could find. Actually, I'm in the process now of knowing people who can remove it. So, my head doesn't come do that soon because stuff likes to go missing, so it's getting annoying. It's more annoying than scary, even. But
Mm.
and I think it sets the dogs off all the time too. So if you can hear them, I don't know if you can hear them
Yeah,
barking in the background now, but
yeah. It's your spirits all kind of piping up. Maybe they're watching the show.
exactly. And according to some psychics I talked to, he has been right around me when I'm doing a show, so he knows I'm
Mhm.
talking about him. But
Yeah.
so hypnotism. So What would you say is your favorite part about being a hypnotherapist? What what brings you the most joy of doing it?
Well, it's quite interesting actually, because when I started out, it was curiosity. It was just, it was suddenly I having access to people connecting to guides and spirits and this and past lives, and so it started off more curiosity, but as the years went on with it, I realised that it was a really important tool for healing and helping people. So I think a bit later, I mean, I wasn't always a hypnotherapist. I've done it since I've been 17, but I was an accountant for many years as well. Quite a strange sort of difference there. But um, basically, I started studying clinical hypnotherapy. So when I was 17, I taught myself. I was there was 1991. There was no internet. There was nothing about on hypnosis. So I was teaching myself. So I think the thing I get out the most of it is really that at that time it was curiosity, but later in life I started to study more clinical hypnotherapy and how what can help people really to improve my hypnosis skills, because there's some people struggle a little bit to access, to experience. And I used to wonder, why is it that some people struggle and other people just seem to kind of straight there and talk about it? So I started studying a lot into clinical hypnotherapy to improve my abilities, and suddenly thought, "What, this is like magic. This is incredible that there's people that have got intense panic fears of things that can one session resolves it, or people that have had pain that that the pain can reduce down, or anxieties. There was so many things that this cool new tool that I had. So it put me in a bit of a strange place of, um, do I want to be more of a kind of healing, helping people, or curious and investigating? And I seem to have moved more into the helping people. So I probably get a lot out of just helping people. I've been able to change people's lives. I mean, even when I started it, I thought if I could change one person's life, what I do, then that's a big achievement. And then as I keep going, there's more and more people. So it's a I think it's just an amazing tool. It's working with the mind and helping people.
I agree so much on that. I mean, even just doing this podcast, and part of it's for the same reason, because I like to get people who are authors and people who have services. Like I like to get them out there. I mean,
Mm,
I'm sure they've done a bunch of other podcasts as well, but it's just the fact that more people will find out about them if they're on my show. Even then,
yeah.
that's helping them get out there in the world, and that's I've been told by some that's my purpose, but I don't know fully if that's my
Mm.
purpose. But I like to think I'm doing something right.
Yeah, that's it. It's bringing information to people that, I mean, it's one of these sort of things that you think, well, other people are doing it, so why? What contribution can I really make when there's people much higher than me doing these but bigger podcasts? Or, but really, it's you might just bring somebody to somebody else through your podcast that could change their life, and that's a it's a beautiful network, I guess, that happens, is how we all connect, and the way maybe it all just is supposed to work.
Exactly. So I was looking at your website earlier today just because I was trying to get a grasp for what you do to some degree at least. And I see you do the typical weight loss, smoking cessation type of services. But what is the what was the most strange request you had someone asked you to hypnotize them about?
Poof, there's so many. I mean, I think I mean, I guess it's sometimes it probably doesn't sound strange to me, but asking me to, I guess, their other lives, or um, but I mean, I'm trying to think of some of the strange fears I've had. People scared of paying their bills. That was one that I had. But I mean, you think that it's the irrational fears sometimes people can have. It's something. So I had a guy that was scared of butterflies, a huge big guy scared of butterflies, and they would run a mile into a panic. And it all turned out it was because when he was a baby. that butterfly landed on his nose and gave him such a terror fright that somewhere in his unconscious mind, he then made this butterfly equals danger into fear and panic. And this guy carried that all his life. So you get a lot of strange ones, and I've had that many clients. I'm failing to actually think of some. I know there's even more stranger ones, but they're eluding me at the moment. But you get a lot of it's quite standard, mostly past life, between life, spiritual, and all the kind of anxieties and maybe fears and things.
A man scared of being scared of butterflies. I mean, I know things that happen when we're young can really traumatize us and make us have the weirdest impulses when we're older. But it's just you're not kidding. That is a little bit. That is definitely a little strange. But I mean,
You'd be amazed. Yeah, you'd be amazed that it's, and I suppose it's irrational. This is the way that I understand the mind, is that there's one part of your mind. So the mind works sort of they call it ego states. So that might be that if you think about when your best friend comes to the door, you go into this whole ego state that might be friendly, your hands might be welcoming, your tonal voice may go up. Like, how you doing? It's really good to see you. You've got a whole set of unconscious responses all happening at that present moment for that situation. Whereas if it was a salesperson that was being very pushy, maybe trying to force you to sign something, put his foot in your door, you wouldn't have that same sort of persona. It would be a completely different persona that you're not consciously switching on. It's just all happening. But through life, we go through experiences that may traumatize, or the many traumas that make us scared or fearful, like turbulence on an airplane. And then 2 years later, someone's trying to get onto that plane, and here's this part of them that's bringing up this fear and terror, thinking I'm going to die because the turbulence was so bad. But the other part of their minds that are thinking, well, it's not that dangerous. It's just an airplane, and nobody else is panicking. So it creates this kind of conflict. And so these irrational fears are really they're just parts of the mind that have taken on a belief, a perception, and sometimes it's almost like they're isolated from the rest of the mind and the rational mind, and it's almost going in and speaking to that part to help that part realize that it is irrational and that it's safe. And here's another part of the mind. You're helping the mind helps itself. You bring one part, bring it to the other. So it's so these irrational fears, they can be associated to other experiences. They can be based on something that's happened, and not even necessarily in this life. It could be past life. Someone drowned, and suddenly there's an irrational fear of what, or going near in a boat or something. So, so it's interesting. The mind seems to work in. I guess it's like I see this. They call it parts. They call it ego states. But it's the way that the mind seems to be in all these. It can be working in different ways. So and competing with each other or conflicting. Think of someone that's trying to stop eating chocolate. You might say, "Oh, I really want that chocolate. I need to get that chocolate." But then there's another part. I need to stop eating that chocolate. It's this internal fight that's going on in the mind, and one part may have emotional needs because, and it was told as a young child that it will get a chocolate if it's good, and it'll be a treat. Whereas there's another part that knows that chocolate's not very good for you and it's not a treat. But there they are arguing or in conflict with each other. So it's almost trying to change the way that the mind. This is from the clinical perspective, is trying to help the mind make those changes, those sort of realizations.
Yes, and as someone who just had gastric bypass surgery almost a year ago, I could tell you that internal battle about chocolate has been going on in my mind since I was a fat kid. But it's just the way it goes. And I mean, as a smoker too, I could see that there's that internal debate there too, because it's like, oh, I'm stressed. I need a cigarette versus I know it's going to kill me soon. But it's just those debates.
And the bit that usually the part of you that is, if it's so something like smoking, is they say that there's smoking, the actual addiction is only a couple of days for the nicotine to leave the system, but the actual it's the habits that are there. That's what you're trying to break. Is more the habits, but you sometimes behind habits is emotional needs, things that maybe, like you say, you may believe that smoking actually relaxes you, but in actual fact, when you're taking those chemicals into the body, it's putting the body in a fight or flight response, and it's got to work harder to really sort of get this stuff out your system. So in a way, your body's not really relaxing; it's doing the opposite. But you believe that it's relaxing you. So it's so with something like smoking, that's really trying to break down these habits, these beliefs, and these emotional links, I guess, to it.
Yeah, as far as smoking goes, it ties a lot into boredom usually too, because you're just like, oh, what to do now? And it's like, oh, I can go smoke a steak.
And that's it. It's funny because that again, it's with alcohol sometimes, with smoking. A lot of the time, it is a boredom thing as well. So it might be it's trying to ask yourself, what could I do right now that is because it's technically the smoking, the drinking, drugs, or the resource, a poor resource to meet a need to whether it is to relieve boredom or something. But I think using your creative mind, you could think, well, what could I do right now that is better than smoking? And it's trying to get your mind into finding those better resources. So it could be listening to podcasts. It could be I'll just go out and have a walk. And so it's try to get yourself into these sort of forward. What would be the word for it? More solution focused and trying to break these little habits that we kind of carry.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. But you, I know you do. You said it, and yeah, I saw it on your website as well. You do past life regressions, which past lives fascinate me to no end. I've had a few people on who've done them on the show, and like, have you? And I always ask this question. I never really got like a answer. I always get an answer, but I never get like the answer I hope to get one day. Have you ever done a past life regression for somebody and found out they were actually someone like famous in a past life? Or
Yeah, I mean, generally it is pretty standard, normal people. In terms of famous, I did have somebody once experience as a painter. I started out just as painter. They were and it was who was it? It was big painter, Italian. I forgot his name. What's his name?
I was
Yeah,
I would start naming Italian painters, but I'd be here all day.
I can guarantee if you pick the most famous, that'll be,
Picasso,
it wasn't Picasso.
Michelangelo.
Leonardo da Vinci,
Oh,
the
okay.
painter, inventor. But the strangest thing was that I'm trying to remember the session. It was quite a long time, but some of the answers that was being given, because I knew a little bit about Leonardo da Vinci. I knew that they didn't know who the Mona Lisa was based on, um, but this girl that was saying that she was him said that it was based on his mother.
Yeah.
So after I went looking, and it was that there was all these claims of who it was, but it was somebody like Freud or something that says that he thinks it might have been the mother. But there was other things like moved to France, so she was living in France and had been invited to France, had been at this a gallery that he was with his paintings, and he didn't like he didn't like being there. He didn't like the types of people that were there. And after it, looking up, he had actually moved to France at the request of the king or something, and saw somebody's life out in France. And so it was quite interesting, some of the little details that were coming up. And for that girl, actually, she sort of ended up in more of a creative, artistic type thing. She sent me something that she sculpted, and it was amazing. It was this little sort of sculpture that she'd made, and it seemed to sort of send her into more of a creative, artistic type of path in her life. But generally, I've done thousands of past life regressions probably over the years, and generally they're all pretty normal. They're people that just standard normal people. But the best thing, the one thing that I always remember is that every life is unique, and it has its purposes, and and sometimes it can be someone's been shown a life that they live almost in poverty, but they've got family around about them, and it's almost showing this as if the mind seems to know what it wants to show you. This is the cool thing about this, is you don't need to be too the less involved I am, the more that the mind seems to know exactly what it wants to do. Sometimes it's even jumped into a second life, and that second life has actually had a real bearing on the message that comes from the two of them had to be shown that relates to them now. And it's almost like the mind is it knows it's trying to squeeze this other life in. So it's so generally, but it is pretty standard normal people that you normally just come up someone like, it could be just a tribes person, or I've had maybe I remember one woman, it was an angry Russian woman who washed clothes, and it seemed like a real horrible life. It was, she never married, she wasn't very good looking, just went, got these clothes, took them back and washed them, and that was her life. But then it was shown another life in Venezuela, where she was a man, and that man was had a good position in the town. He had a good family, but not a lot really happened. It was just this nice, loving family, had his position in town, done his work, and at the end of it, it was from a kind of guide point of view. It was said that the stuff that you're going through now in your life, it's challenging, but when you look at both of those lives, not always the easy life, the easy path is the right path. You actually probably learn more out of this Russian woman having to deal with all these emotions and this anger. And so it was saying basically that sometimes the harder lives are actually the ones that give you the most growth through what you need to experience, I guess.
Well, I mean, it makes sense. You learn more if you have to. You learn more if you have to work your way through life than if you're just handed everything, because then you're not learning anything. I mean, it's
Yeah.
basically like being a rich kid. Like, you're just given everything without having to earn it, and you don't learn anything. Responsibility. You don't learn the meaning of a dollar. Like, you just are given everything, and you don't develop anything
Yeah.
until you're forced to later in life at some point. But it's
Mm.
just so it makes sense. It really does. Yeah, I was supposed to have a past life reading done months ago by a guest on my show, but it never happened. I keep meaning to get back to her about it because it interests me so much, like who I could have been in the past life.
Yeah. It's a cool one. The first one that I ever did when I was 17, and it was my young brother at 6. He was my little guinea pig, and I was trying out hypnosis. I had him picking daisies out of a carpet, and I'm thinking, wow, this works. This is cool. And then I did a past life regression, and the stuff he was coming out with, he was like, this is a 6-year-old saying that he was married with a child. He wrote children's books about dragons or something, and but he was dying of a skin disease and was really worried about his leaving his family behind. And so it's just, I think it's the phenomena of it. It's quite bizarre. I mean, I guess I'm trying to guide people. People come for these sessions, but very often it can be a complete for some hypnotherapists and stuff that don't really deal with this, it can just go straight to these other lives and start talking about these lives. So that it can be quite fascinating who we are, what we are, and I guess it's an accumulation of who we are now. It's we carry all of that, all the sort of the learnings, I guess, of who we are. Our soul's the accumulation of all the lives.
Makes sense. I mean, and I'm guessing as a past life regressionist that you believe in reincarnation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you know about a guy called the Canadian Ian Stevenson. So he used to do a lot of studies on children with past life recall. So a lot of children don't even really need hypnosis because around about the ages of 2 to 7, they've not really developed a critical kind of part in their mind. So, in fact, there's a Swiss psychologist. There was the guy called Jean Piaget, who said that the kind of between the ages of 2 and 7 is when before this cognitive kind of critical kind of part of the mind starts to develop. But Ian Stevenson this Professor Ian Stevenson studied lots of children talking about past life regression, and he said that it seems to fade when about 7 years old. So it ties in with this Piaget. But one of the things he did about it's probably one of the sort of most sciencey type of things to back up reincarnation is that what he found through studies, I think it was something like 33% of the people that he sort of the children that he worked with, when they found the person that he was supposed to be in his past lives, they had a birthmark in the same place as where the wound was of the person that in the past. So it was this. So this was something like 33% of the people that they could find that these children were supposed to have been had a kind of similar wound, a birthmark where the wound was for where these people had died. So that's a little thing to back it up with reincarnation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just for the record, as my listeners know, I'm a huge believer in reincarnation. We actually just did an episode on it on my other paranormal podcast. That's a discussion podcast, and there are so many stories out there about children remembering things all over the world that they shouldn't know, remembering world wars that happened and details about these wars that happened 70 years before they were born. Like, it's insane.
I'll tell you, on Prime, Amazon Prime, there's this TV show called The Ghost Inside My Child, and that's what that's about. It's all these children that are kept talking about. They're going through little, like, can't sleep at night. They're going through night terrors, and it's all they're talking about these past lives. So it's quite a good series. It's done a little bit like the Ancient Alien things, where it's the dramatic music and things, but it's quite good stories. It's real people, and it's how the mothers and fathers have done the investigations and what they've found and how they tie up to who these children are saying that they are. So it's quite recent as well. Maybe in the last 5-6 years, maybe that was it.
Yeah, I think I've heard of it. I think I saw it on Discovery Plus back when I had that app. But stuff like that just fascinates me to no end. I've heard a lot of stories on podcasts about it, and it's just like, wow.
I'll tell you, there's one guy, his name was Captain Robert Snow, I think, who was a captain at the Indianapolis police, and I think it was a dare or something. I think he was there to go for a past life regression, and he had recalled, I think it was an English portrait artist or something that way back in about 100 years before, prior, and he ended up through his past life regression. All the things that he said, I think it was 28 of the points that he said were accurate. 28 out of the 30 points that he said when he investigated it, they all tied in. And he actually says there's people go to jail for less evidence than what this past life regression is telling you. So it's fascinating that there's a lot of things out there, really.
There is. I mean, it's amazing. And the fact that the Eastern world, or I'm sorry, the Western world doesn't really like a lot. A lot of us were brought up not to believe in reincarnation because it's not a Christian Catholic thing to believe, Jewish thing to believe. In all the Eastern religions, Hinduism, like Buddhism, they all believe in it, and that's why a lot of the stories come from that part of the world because they're brought up that it can happen. Yeah. So they're brought up that when you're brought up to believe something can happen, you're not going to be afraid to talk about it if you have these memories when you're a kid.
Yeah.
But I mean, in America, I've talked to people who they said they had memories as a kid, and their parents still talk about them like that, but they just didn't. They weren't brought up to talk about it, so they didn't talk about it. They kept it to themselves because they didn't want anyone to think they're crazy.
Yeah, I mean, children, they are they're so open. Even children will talk about ghosts as well. That they'll actually. I had a friend who had a little boy, and when there was, I think, like your house, there was some stuff going on where they could hear footsteps going up and down the stairs, and someone walking along the halls. And my brother was in helping to do some work on the house, and he said it was in there himself, and he could hear footsteps coming up, and he's going out to see who it was, and there was no one there. But they had a little boy, and I think he just said why is that man standing in our kitchen? And they're going, there's nobody there. Yes, there is. There's a man standing in our kitchen. So children, like we said, they've not developed this kind of critical sort of disbelieving element of the mind. And that's basically what I think that's why they're accessing it. And I think this is why hypnosis opens us up, because it helps to sort of suspend this sort of disbelief, and it allows us just to access unconsciously.
Yeah, it frees your mind in a way. Like it makes you put down all the walls in your mind when and from my understanding, it kind of like knocks down your safeguards and lets you go into a trance where you're willing to admit things you wouldn't admit normally. So, which makes sense. I mean, it's too bad hypnosis isn't allowed in like court. Like it could be like one of the greatest crime solving things in the world. But
yeah, it's probably I mean it's been used in some things, but I don't think they allow it as full evidence. It's probably because you could fake it. Really, I think you could fake it. It's hard to know 100% someone is in hypnosis, and there's such a spectrum on it as well. There's some people will struggle with it. There's some people that are very suggestible. In my mind, hypnosis is in everything. It's when you watch adverts on TV, there's elements of hypnosis happening in that. So it's happening in every day. In fact, there's a brilliant book, and it's called Monsters and Magical Sticks, and it's all about because he gave his little boy a magical stick because he was scared of ghosts in the cupboard or monsters in the cupboard, or in a cupboard or under the bed. I can't remember, but and it was this belief was giving him too much terror. But then to hold this imaginary stick, or this stick that would imagine it, make the kind of monsters go away, it was just all about what he said is there's no such thing as hypnosis because everything is hypnosis. And so really I think it's more about the suggestibility. There's some people that are highly suggestible. There's other people that are very analytical and they can struggle because they're not letting go. They're too trying to control too much, and that can make it struggle. So I suppose the reason it's probably never ended up in places like court and things is because it can be manipulated and it's probably not always reliable. But at the same point, I think it's helped with some things where people have been able to recall from an unconscious perspective, like where somebody was or what car it was, the registration plate for something. So it has aided, I think, in court cases.
Well, actually, it's funny you bring that up because since we're on paranormal, since this is a paranormal show, because one of the most famous cases that hypnosis was used in the paranormal world is the Betty and Barney Hill abduction, which they had a hypnotist do recordings with both of them. And I don't know if you ever actually have checked out those recordings, but it is some of the stuff that they unlocked once they were under was crazy. Like the medical stuff done to them on the UFO, supposedly.
Yeah, and there's a lot of cases like this. I mean, you can go right away back to Edgar Casey, if you've ever heard of that guy. But again, he was someone who was.
I've heard the name.
He was. The guy was amazing. It's him that talked a lot about Atlantis, and people were writing to him, and they would go into this hypnotic state, and then just say they would read the sort of questions or the ailments that they had, and he would tell them, they would say what they had to do, and it was all coming. I guess it was obviously maybe like a channel type of kind of situation, but through the use of hypnosis. So he was huge. Edgar Casey, he's quite a big name.
Yeah, the name sounds so familiar, but I just can't place it like where I've heard of it. But I know I've heard it. And it's funny you mentioned Atlantis. I just released an episode like a week or two ago where I actually had someone on the show who believes him and his partner found Atlantis, and that they know exactly where the main city was. So it's a really fascinating topic. And
yeah, I'm big on it. I'm fascinated. I love even the new. I don't know if you've seen the Graham Hancock thing on Netflix. That's quite good. Where he's talking about I guess it's try to look at the sort of geology and the sort of I guess the evidence that's there, like in Turkey, Göbekli Tepe, and these kind of ancient sites that are starting to show that there was civilizations going back 12,000 odd years, 13,000 years ago that had technologies and understandings of things that we didn't. How they're supposed to be hunter gatherers, and that's my kind of belief, is that they go back to there's been advanced civilizations. It comes through my sessions. I've had people actually come back to these places and experiencing these developed, sophisticated technological races that seem to live back in Lemuria, Atlantis type times.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, you always when we were growing up, when I was growing up at least, because I mean, I grew up in the '90s, and we always heard that Atlantis was it sunk into the ocean, like that was the common belief back then. But this guest, and I'm not gonna give too much away because I want people to listen to the episode. And he did write a book. He has a documentary coming out, which I can't wait to see. But basically, Atlantis was where our desert currently is, and at one point it was a rainforest basically, but over time it just dried out and became a desert. But so I mean, it's kind of cool how the perceptions that we all believed are just not really true to the fullest extent. But
Well, this is the cool thing. I mean, we've got this kind of big missing piece of the jigsaw in the middle. It's obviously the power of nature has destroyed this entire civilization, or they destroyed themselves, which a lot of things come through the sessions, that they manipulated energies and they were manipulating technologies and destroyed themselves. But I suppose this is, as we say, there's people like this guy Graham Hancock that is finding he's researching all these kind of places, these different places all around the world that are starting to show commonalities, civilizations that talk about the same kind of things, that these advanced beings coming and helping them, showing them how to grow crops. And so it does, and it's good that some of the work that I do with some people is that it takes people who are actually recalling these times, these places.
well, let me ask you this, because you mentioned in the beginning that when you were young, the pyramids fascinated you about how they were all over the world. So, do you think that ancient people actually built them themselves, or do you believe they had some help from extraterrestrials, like a lot of people believe?
I think probably a bit of a mixture of both. I think that probably connection to ETs, and again, we could call them ETs as if they're something strange, but from the work that I've done, is that extraterrestrial or other beings, it's like they're no different. They're souls just like us. It's just that they exist in a sort of a dimension that we are not aware of from here, but are interacting in ways. Um, and it does seem that there was better connections to these beings, so there was more interaction maybe with them. So I think that, I mean, you can go, even from things I know, you can look back to things like how they talk about man was a kind of a slave race to mine gold. That was an Anunnaki or something. I think that was the story behind a story from them, was that there was these kind of gods that came down, aliens, whatever, came down, wanted to mine, so they took something like man and genetically kind of manipulated it to have them that would, I don't know, be a kind of slave type race type of thing. So I think from my perspective, I reckon that it's been a bit of a mixture, is that the sort of general human has been of more advanced, more even genetically advanced, more intelligent, more connected, more maybe more connected spiritually, but had interaction also with these others that I guess helped.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the theory that the old gods or ancient gods were all mainly aliens, extraterrestrials, whatever you want to call them, and that they were coming to try to teach humans how to I mean, I could believe in the slave theory too, because I mean, why wouldn't they use us to do what they want? They're way more intelligent and advanced than we ever will be for a long time, so it makes sense. But
You think you could look at that? I mean, when we say a slave race, it sounds quite bad, but in actual fact, that slave race has continued to progress, and maybe now as we kind of move further forward, we're starting to advance spiritually and become more connected. So who knows whether there's so many theories around about it, but it's hard to know for
yeah,
sure.
I mean, I've heard, and I also can kind of believe in a theory that they brought humans here from another planet to be like workers basically and just mine whatever metals they wanted, or because that's actually a theory about why there's so many UFOs around my area, is that the mountain that we live on has some kind of metal in it that aliens use for their ships. So they come here and they just kind of suck it out of the ground and keep going. But
Yeah, possible. Yeah, definitely. I think
it's
and this is it. There's so many. I think it's the way that I kind of look at us is we're almost like blinkered. We've got blinders on. We only see a very small fraction, I guess, of what everything that is. Um, Through things like hypnosis and hypnotherapy and into the between life type stuff is where you start to maybe then realize that there is these other beings and there's beings that help us and that we've all each of our lives have got purpose and meaning, and it's all about um, even sometimes the hardest challenges are actually the challenges that provide us with an opportunity to grow. So it's almost like there's this. The word I love to use is elegance. There's an elegance to everything. It seems to all have a purpose and a plan, and we're all working along, and we're perfect ways.
yeah, I agree with that because I've had people on the show who I had an author who wrote a book about lucid dreaming and astral projection, and
Mm-hmm.
he straight up said he's like there are so many dimensions out there that I've traveled to in my dreams that most humans will never see, and some of them you don't want to see because he said like all these dimensions have their own inhabitants, but some of them have give off good vibes and seem like friendly creatures. Some of them, he said, give you the biggest scare of your life, and you don't want to go back there ever again.
Now, and the interesting thing is that some of us have been those beings. I've had clients who have went to strange worlds and been. Remember, there was one they said they were like it was like a watertight world where the only way they were kind of energetic, but the only way she could describe herself was a bit like a jellyfish, but intelligent. So these places are so it's as much as we reincarnate into this earth, there's nothing to stop us from being these other beings as well and being in these other places. And again, that's something that comes up a lot in some of the between life sessions that I'm doing, where and even you could try and do a past life and suddenly someone's in a completely different place. As they're taught this alien world, describing something very, very strange. And at first you're trying to figure out what is this place Earth? This doesn't sound like Earth. And what do you look like? And they're talking about strange fingers and different colours. And so it's there is a lot of strange things come up, but it just seems that we don't always need to come to Earth. That we could have been in other places and other lives. I guess it's whatever. And one of the things that comes up a bit as well is that there is some of us are beings who have came here purely to help with an ascension or to help us along to try and get us out of this denser frequency energy.
Makes sense. I mean, it would make sense that if our spirits, souls, whatever you want to call them, when they go to get reincarnated, because I've been told it's basically like a giant waiting room. That's what other psychics and mediums have told me, is that it's like a giant waiting room up there, and you're basically either you reached your full potential and you get to go to some place that no one knows about, or you come back to Earth, or I mean, it's possible we go to other planets too instead and take the different forms on, or different dimensions.
I guess it's whatever's right for your growth, and it seems that even the people that this is one of the interesting things with past lives. If you ask someone to look, so say they're married to someone and you ask them to look into the eyes of that person, you can say, is that familiar in any way? And they may say, that's my aunt or that's my brother. So, and it's the idea of soul groups, is that we are all part of soul groups. We've got guides that help us and they help us plan our lives. And these lives will, I guess, the opportunities, the challenges, they'll be presented along these lives. But these other people, these other souls that are coming in as your brother, your wife, your father, they have all got a contribution to play and soul agreements between each other. So it's like a play. It's the best way to think of it. It's a big stage play where we've taken the characters and we come out and we play these different characters and then we leave. And again, don't believe in death. I think death is more of an awakening, that we will awaken back and then we'll agree again to come back in. Again, it's like a virtual reality computer game where we plug back in again and we come in and we live another life, and it may be a different dynamic this time with this soul family. So, and these concepts as well, they come out a lot. The first I heard about them was a guy called Dr. Michael Newton, who wrote a couple of big famous books, Journey of Souls, Destiny of Souls, and he'd done something like 7,000 test cases over his entire career. And he started off as just I think it was a counselling psychotherapist, I think, and wasn't really interested at all in things like past life regression, but fell into that and started trying to kind of do a kind of more of a science approach to it, to go through each single person and comparing all these people, and through these 7,000 people that you work with, all these concepts of soul groups, soul families, soul contracts, the council of elders, which were these other beings that seem to also help us, but were maybe of a higher ascension, or so. But it was I guess it was the number of people that were all saying the same things, and it starts to kind of then make you think, well, none of these people know each other. Why are they all saying the same things, talking about colours of souls and things? So it's fascinating.
It is. I mean, it's been one of the biggest mysteries over the last 100 years. And there's been so many TV shows about it, movies about it. Like, what happens after you die? Like, that's been the biggest question. Because it can't be as most people, I believe, can't. They don't think it's as simple as what religions will tell you. Like, oh, there's only two places. You go to one of them. Like, it doesn't seem that simple. Like, it shouldn't be.
Yeah, I mean, I've done probably thousands. I reckon maybe a couple of thousand past life regressions, and you take them to the end of their life and ask them. So again, what I try to do is not to lead people. I don't want to be saying, okay, go to that, go to the light, go to the, taking it from maybe perceptions and concepts of what we think maybe happens. I'll say is, okay, go to that last breath. What happens next? And the majority of people will talk about floating out. They'll talk about light. They'll talk about a feeling, that this total release and this really amazing feeling, or then sort of floating somewhere, feeling presences, guides coming to help. And so it's so common, and it seems to be that. And even when you look at things like Dr. Raymond Moody did all the near-death experience stuff, it was all similar stuff, that these tunnels of lights and people talking about, well, they all come back again. So it's the near-death experience actually is very similar to the same things that the people are experiencing through things like hypnosis, through the deaths after the past lives.
Yeah, I've had a few NDEs or near-death experiences on this podcast, and it's funny though, what they all say happened to them, like when they died, for that short time. It's always different. None of them, like, there's a few similarities, but they all have different, like, I mean, so maybe it is what you see, what you want to see, kind of.
Yeah, I'll explain that, and why that happens is that, so this happened to me one time. I'll tell you this little story. It was somebody that came to see me, and the guide was a unicorn. So I think, oh, come on, something. This woman will be thinking this is insane. So went through the session. She was showing this place where she worked. She was part of this place, and they helped other souls that had had lives to heal here. So she had a really important place. So a little bit further through, it just bugged me. Why would a guide be a unicorn? Now, I'm not going to diss unicorns, and maybe they are other dimensional beings. Maybe they were beings of Atlantis. Who knows? But what I asked her to say is, "Are you a unicorn?" And it said no. It says, "But we represented. It took the form of a unicorn because we were wanting to show this girl that this was a place of magic, and she identifies magic to unicorns." And it says we don't have physical form. We are not. So we don't have physical form. We're not. But what I think they're doing is they're using visual language, visual representations to help us to understand what they are. So you may see someone that's standing like a monk, a guide that's an old wise monk, and they're not a monk, and they're probably, but what they're trying to do is visually communicate to you who they are and giving you the best representation. So I guess it's, in a way, it's all energy. It's all energy. Even you can look at things like quantum physics, where they say that there is no physical matter. Everything is basically atoms that are then filling 99% of space, and then into that it's protons and neutrons, and then down into that is quarks, which are just events that appear. So our whole physical reality doesn't seem to really exist the way we think it does. It's like an energetic construct, almost like a pixelated virtual reality type of thing. But we are limited to these senses, whether it's visual or feeling or auditory. And what it seems is that these experiences that people are having, I guess that it's maybe unique because it's a visual representation. It's their interpretation of what it would visually look like, but there is no visual reality of it. It's an energetic experience. It's a energetic consciousness. So I guess that's why there can be variances in the way people experience, because it's their interpretation, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you could almost say it's a matrix of sorts we live in, which a lot of people believe it is some kind of extraterrestrial matrix that where we're just plugged back in when our current character ends, we just get plugged back into another character, kind of.
Yeah, that's it. It's just back to the soul groups and the soul families and past life regression coming back in and taking, like the play, taking the different characters.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just there's so many rabbit holes when you talk about this that you can go down, like trying to pick different theories that are out there. It's just insane.
Yeah.
But
The cool thing is that there's so many people coming with these same experiences. That's what's fascinating about it. And it's, I mean, when I started doing this between life stuff, so this is past the death point of past life and start to maybe ask more stuff from spirit guides and things. The only reason I get into that was because I did a lot of past life regression, but then I'd never really ventured past that death point. And I read the Michael Newton book, Journey of Souls, way back in 2010, I think it was. And I thought, okay, he's getting all the same results, but is he maybe leading them, asking them questions that are likely to give them answers based on, that are going to basically kind of correlate? So that's what I started doing. I started trying to do it with people, but trying to be very non-leading, not being very open with my questions. Things like, where are you now? What are you experiencing? Try not to give their mind anything, a suggestion basically of tell me what heaven looks like, and then okay, heaven, or so their mind would then start creating a version of what heaven may look like. So I'm being very open but very non-leading with the questions, and a lot of the same things started coming up as well. So for me, again, it was just this. It was like when I first did my first past life regressions, the spiritual stuff as well. I'm thinking, this is cool. This is bringing the same types of things up, and it's the same concepts without me being leading. So it kind of convinced me really that there's a lot in this, and here I am. It's my occupation.
that's yeah, it's fascinating, and it's great that you do it in that way. But before I let you go and let you give out where people can find you, I wouldn't be a good paranormal show host if I didn't ask someone from Scotland what they think about Nessie.
Nessie. Well, I reckon. I think there's been something. I think there's got to be. There's a great museum up there that shows you a lot of. It's like, if you ever get to Scotland, go up to the Loch Ness Museum, Loch Ness Monster Museum. But I mean, my grandfather had an experience. They went up camping, and apparently he looked over and seen like some like 3 or 4 big ring pools in the water, something that sunk down. But I think there's maybe some kind of prehistoric or some sort of species of animal. I mean, Loch Ness is very, very deep, and it's got a lot of caves and things. So,
Yes.
and then you look at where Loch Ness is. I mean, you've got the Atlantic Ocean around the North Sea as well. So maybe some of these things are out. They say that we've explored a lot of the Earth, but not the sea. The sea is there's so much of the sea that we've not explored. So there may be prehistoric creatures, things that we've just never encountered yet. Maybe they hibernate. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a full believer in Nessie since I was a kid because I read so many books about it when I was a kid that it just that's one of my favorite topics in the paranormal world is living dinosaurs, which there are cases of different ones all over the world, but the whole sea monsters theory with Nessie and all the American versions of it, that's just there's too many different ones for there not to be something there.
Yeah, you look back to some of the old sort of seafaring days where they all spoke about sea monsters. You can go right away back to like when they were exploring the world and trying to maybe before I guess when was it when does Captain or where was it? Was it 1600s or something that
it was in the 15 to 1700s when they really did a lot of navigating and discovering.
Yeah, that's it. So I've no doubt there's probably something up there. There's been, I mean, you still get sightings. This is the thing. Still, people still see things. So there's something. So who knows?
Yeah, I knew from the second I knew you were from Scotland. I'm like, all right, now I got to ask him about Nessie. I have to.
Yeah.
There's no way around it. But
I'll tell you, Scotland it's full of. I mean, Nessie's the famous one, but there's so much like giants, and you've heard of probably Stonehenge down in England, but actually in a tiny little island, Harrison Lewis, and Lewis, there's the Callanish stones, which again are these megalithic standing stones that in Orkney, the island of Orkney, there's these kind of again ancient sort of settlements and things. So there's so much history with Scotland. Scotland's soaked in myth and history. You've got Isle of Skye that talks about chieftains and fairies, that fairies have came through or something. So there's the fairy glens, and there's these little things called it's called the Fairy Glen. It's little cone-shaped mountains. I think it's just natural kind of formations, but they call it the Fairy Glens. And there's all this myth about Skye and things. So Scotland's full of. That's what I like about Scotland is that it's got all this soaked in history and just beautiful scenery.
Oh God, I mean, it's like I told you before. Like I did an ancestry test a few years ago, and I found out that part of my ancestry is Scottish. And I mean, it's always been on my bucket list to visit anyway because Scotland and Ireland, and I mean, a lot of Europe. I've never been to Europe, so like, I would love to spend like a year in Europe just going to different countries. But
yeah, the world is full of amazing places. I've seen quite a few places. I've been to like Tokyo and South Africa, Croatia, Spain, France, Mexico, Thailand. The world is incredible, and if I could spend my life traveling, I probably would.
I think a lot of us would, but it's so dang expensive nowadays. It's just not logical for a lot of people. But someday, that's why I put money into a retirement fund. So hopefully someday I can do it, as long as I'm in good enough health. But but I want to thank you for coming on, Stephen. It's been an amazing episode, and I can't wait for my listeners to hear it.
Yeah, not a problem. It's been good to be here, Jeremy. Thanks for having me on again.
Oh, my pleasure. And why don't you tell my listeners where they can find you and your services?
So my website's probably the best place, which is just www. Well, actually, it's https:// Stephen Towill. Google Stephen Towill. Stephen, and Towill is Towill. It's like two will. .com. So people can see what I do and book sessions straight from the site. I post a lot of stuff on things like Instagram. So Instagram's probably my biggest platform for where I get a lot of my clients. So again, Stephen Towill Hypnotherapy on Instagram. They'll find me and see all the crazy, weird and wonderful things that I write about and post about. And I actually throw a lot of humour, a lot of spiritual humour, silly memes, funny memes. First I found that they were actually very good for engagement and people liked them and they get more likes and stuff than my post I would spend hours writing. But what I realised is it brings a lot of joy and laughter to a world sometimes that is stuck with horrible news and wars and viruses. So it's a nice little escape for spiritual humour as well. I put a lot of stuff out on it.
Sounds amazing. And I will put your website in the description of the show of this episode so that everybody can just click on it and go to it. But of course.
Perfect.
And
okay.
Want to thank you one more time for coming on. And to all my listeners, you can find me on Facebook as Paranormal the New Normal / Maniacal Music Musings Podcast with a S Facebook group. You could find me on Twitter and Instagram as @JuggaloBastard. You can find me on TikTok as @JuggaloBastard Podcasts. And you can find us on YouTube as Paranormal New Normal, which we now stream on YouTube as well. So anytime I do a live, it's right on YouTube as I'm doing it. So thank you all for listening. And thank you, Stephen, again for coming on. It's been a truly fascinating hour. I will see all my listeners next week, or half a week, actually. But catch you next time.